The Boy Who Was Born in a Wooden Cabin. In the cold, silent winter of February 12, 1809, in a small wooden cabin in Kentucky, a boy was born who would one day change the history of an entire nation. The cabin had no elegant furniture, no soft bed, no warm carpets. The floor was made of hard earth. The wind entered through the cracks in the wooden walls. There were no lamps or candles burning brightly. Only a small fire gave a faint light. The boy's name was Abraham Lincoln. His parents, Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, were poor farmers. They owned very little land. They worked hard from sunrise to sunset just to survive. Life was not easy for them. Every day was a struggle against hunger, cold, sickness, and uncertainty. Young Abraham, often called Abe, did not have the chance to go to a proper school. His total formal education over his entire childhood was less than 1 year. But what he did have was something far more powerful, an endless curiosity and a burning desire to learn. He would walk miles just to borrow a book from someone. He read by firelight at night after long days of farm work. His hands were rough from cutting trees and carrying logs. His back hurt from working in the fields. Yet even when his body was exhausted, his mind stayed awake with dreams. He read everything he could find: the Bible, Aesop's fables, Robinson Crusoe, and books about American history. Each word opened a new world to him. Each story told him that there was something more in life than just plowing fields. At the age of 9, tragedy struck. His mother, Nancy, became ill from a disease known as milk sickness. Medicine was limited. Doctors were rare. One day, she closed her eyes and never opened them again. The young boy was heartbroken. He had lost the person who had encouraged him to read and learn. That pain stayed in his heart for the rest of his life. Years later, Lincoln would say that everything good in him came from his mother. A few years later, his father married a kind woman named Sarah Bush Johnston. She noticed Abraham's love of reading and learning. Unlike many others, she didn't force him to work every moment. Instead, she encouraged his education. In her heart, she knew that this boy was different. As Abraham grew, he became very tall and very strong. By the time he was a teenager, he was already over 6 feet tall. He could lift heavy logs, chop wood faster than any other man in the village, and was known for his incredible strength. But even more than his physical power, people began to notice his mind. He was a storyteller. When people gathered in the evenings, Abraham would entertain them with stories, jokes, and thoughtful ideas. He had a special way of making people laugh, but also making them think deeply. Still, life was hard. At the age of 19, his family moved again, this time to Indiana, then later to Illinois. He worked as a shopkeeper, a ferryman, a postmaster, and even a soldier for a short period. He failed in business. He lost money. He went into debt. Many people would have given up. But Abraham Lincoln did not. He once said, "My great concern is not whether you have failed, but whether you are content with your failure." Through every defeat, he learned something new. During this time, he discovered a passion for law. Without going to a formal law school, without a university degree, he began to study law on his own. He would read legal books for hours. He would take notes. He would practice speaking in front of mirrors. He would attend court sessions and observe how lawyers and judges spoke. Eventually, he passed the bar exam and became a lawyer. From a poor boy in a wooden cabin to a self-taught lawyer, but this was only the beginning of his journey. As he began traveling from town to town, solving cases, meeting people, and hearing their stories, he noticed something painful and terrible in America: slavery. He saw men and women treated like property, bought and sold, beaten and broken. He saw children separated from their parents, families destroyed in the name of money and power. And something inside him said, "This is wrong, and I must do something about it." At first, he entered politics quietly. He ran for office and failed. He ran again and failed. He was defeated again and again. People laughed at him. They said, "He's too poor, too uneducated, too strange-looking, too soft." But inside Abraham Lincoln, a voice kept whispering, "Try again." Years passed. Wrinkles formed on his face. His eyes carried the weight of sadness and hope mixed together. Yet his determination grew stronger. Finally, in 1860, the impossible happened. Abraham Lincoln, the poor boy from a wooden cabin, was elected President of the United States. But the moment of victory was also the moment of greatest danger. The country was breaking apart. States were leaving the Union. A terrible civil war was about to begin. Brother would fight against brother, father against son. The land would be soaked with blood and tears, and it was now his responsibility to save the nation. As he stood in the White House for the first time, looking out the window at the streets of Washington, he knew something very clearly.
On the day Abraham Lincoln was sworn in as President of the United States, the air in the Capitol was heavy, tense, and filled with fear. Soldiers stood on rooftops. Guards watched every corner. People whispered that he might be assassinated even before he could begin his work. 7 southern states had already declared that they would leave the Union. They did not accept Lincoln as their president. They believed he was a threat to their way of life, especially because his ideas about slavery were slowly becoming known. Lincoln stood tall, his long black coat blowing gently in the cold March wind. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. As the crowd cheered, inside his heart, a storm was rising. He did not want war. He feared war. But he knew war was coming. Just a few weeks later, in April 1861, Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter, a military base belonging to the United States. That single explosion of cannon fire was the beginning of the American Civil War. The nation split in two. The Union, the North, loyal to the United States. The Confederacy, the South, which wanted to separate. Families were torn apart. Neighbors became enemies. Boys as young as 15 signed up to fight. Men who had been farmers the day before now carried guns the next. And Abraham Lincoln, a simple man who loved quiet thinking and gentle humor, now carried the fate of millions on his shoulders. Every day, reports of death arrived on his desk. Thousands of soldiers dying in places with names like Antietam, Gettysburg, Shiloh, and Bull Run. Each letter he read felt like another piece of his soul breaking. At night, when the White House became quiet, Lincoln would sit alone in a dark room, his face in his hands. He thought of the mothers who would never see their sons again. He thought of the wives who would become widows. He thought of children who would grow up without fathers. The stress changed him. The lines on his face deepened. His hair turned gray. His eyes looked older than his years. People said that the war had stolen his youth. But still, he stood. Every general he trusted failed him. Some were weak. Some were afraid. Some did not take action. Lincoln replaced one general after another, searching for someone who would finally bring victory. Often people criticized him. They called him a tyrant. They called him stupid. They called him a dictator. Newspapers printed cartoons making fun of his face, his height, his voice. Political enemies hated him. But Abraham Lincoln never responded with anger. He believed that history would judge him, not people of the moment. And during the darkest days of the war, he made the boldest decision of his life. In 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that declared freedom for millions of enslaved people in the Confederate States. With one signature, he changed the meaning of the war. The war was no longer only about saving the Union. Now, it was also about ending slavery. For the first time in American history, enslaved men, women, and children could hope for freedom. Some people celebrated him as a hero. Others wanted him dead. Threats arrived by the hundreds. People wrote letters promising to kill him, but he refused to hide. He refused to run. He continued walking through the White House halls, through the streets, meeting wounded soldiers in hospitals, shaking their hands, listening to their pain. Sometimes he would sit beside a dying soldier and hold his hand like a father. He would whisper, "You are not forgotten." These words meant more than any medal. One of the most famous moments of his presidency came in 1863 when he gave the Gettysburg Address. It was a short speech, less than 3 minutes long, but it became one of the most powerful speeches in human history. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Those words still live today. As the war continued, hope slowly began to return. Under General Ulysses S. Grant, the Union forces started winning important battles. The Confederate Army grew weaker and weaker. After 4 long, bloody, heartbreaking years, in 1865, the Civil War finally came to an end. The Union was saved. Slavery was dead. The country, though wounded, was whole again. People filled the streets in celebration. Bells rang, flags waved, songs echoed through the cities. Abraham Lincoln had done the impossible. The poor boy from a wooden cabin had saved a nation. But destiny still had one final, tragic chapter left to write. Lincoln spoke about healing. He spoke about rebuilding. He spoke about forgiving the South, not punishing them. He wanted peace. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln decided to enjoy an evening at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. to watch a play. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to relax. Beside him sat his wife, Mary. The theater was filled with laughter, music, and life. In the shadows of the balcony, a man named John Wilkes Booth slowly moved closer. He was angry. He hated Lincoln. He blamed him for the loss of the South. As the audience laughed at a joke on stage, Booth raised a small gun and pulled the trigger. A loud shot filled the theater. Abraham Lincoln collapsed in his seat. People screamed. Chaos erupted. Booth jumped onto the stage and escaped, shouting, "The South is avenged." Lincoln was carried across the street to a small house. Doctors tried to save him, but the damage was too great. The next morning, on April 15, 1865, the great Abraham Lincoln died. The nation fell into deep sorrow. Men cried openly in the streets. Women collapsed in grief. Black Americans mourned him as a savior. White soldiers who had never met him felt like they had lost a father. He had lived for others. He had died for unity. But even in death, Abraham Lincoln became immortal, not in body, but in legacy. His life proved one eternal truth. You do not need to be born rich to become great. You do not need power to change the world. You only need courage, honesty, and the will to stand when others fall.